Start noch 10 Sekunden. 9 Sekunden, 8 Sekunden, 7 Sekunden, 6 Sekunden, 5 Sekunden, 4 Sekunden.
Achtung.
3 Sekunden.
Achtung,
2
Triebwerke.
Sekunden. 1 Sekunde. 0.
Hello and welcome to every single sci-fi film ever. I'm Aisha Khan. Today we'll be talking about the 1960 film Der schweigende Stern, otherwise known as The Silent Star, which was a German and Polish production. Although most of the Western world is facing a huge cultural shift as we head into the 1960s, Germany is different due to it being split into East and West after the Second World War. And in 1960, although East Germany has a huge Soviet/communist influence, the border between East and West Germany is still a porous one. But due to the number of people leaving East Germany and the huge brain drain issue that came with that, the Berlin Wall was put up in 1961. Apologies in advance for some of the traffic sounds that are coming through on this episode. And with that, on to my wonderful guests. Sonja Fritzsche is Professor of German Studies and Senior Associate Dean at Michigan State University. She's also written/edited many books about science fiction. Welcome back, Sonja. It's been quite a while. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to see you too.
Wonderful. Joining Sonja is Yvonne Torner, who is Associate Professor of German Studies and Niehoff Professor of Film and Media Studies at the University of Cincinnati. Welcome to the show, Evan. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well.
Wonderful. I wanted to start off, Sonja, with you, because you were on last time when we spoke about Metropolis, which was around a year ago. Can we get a slight update on what's been happening since 1927? Because we're going from 1927 to 1960. I don't want you to go into all the details. We know there's been a war. But yeah, can we have a slight overview of science fiction cinema since Metropolis bankrupted UFA in 1927?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also, invite my wonderful colleague Evan to join in this conversation too. But there's, like you said, there's been a lot going on historically. Like you had a war, then you have a Cold War, and that's of course influencing a lot of what is going on. And talking about, you have a border right in Germany between East and West. And that is also influencing and lots of uprisings, lots of back and forth. When you take a look at actual science fiction film, there's actually quite a bit of a gap, partially because so many of the resources are going into the war and to the political conflict. Of course, the war ends in 1945, and then you have the establishment of East and West Germany in 1949. And then we're talking about even 10 years later from that. So what I think is particularly interesting is there's such a focus on technology at this time, and the technological advancement is shifting so quickly because of the development of the V2 rocket, the development of course, atomic weapons, and then the use of atomic weapons, and the real concern about what that means ethically and the destruction that has been wrought. So there's in addition, then, of course, you've got a lot of as I mentioned, the Cold War, and then you have this huge growth in science fiction in the United States, in the UK particularly, as you have the pulp magazines come, and really the rise of popular science fiction film is really starting at this time in the 50s. And I bring that up because you have constantly this back and forth between the West and the East that's very important to talk about here. And then you also have what's going on in the Eastern Bloc. So when we take a look at the development of science fiction film, and utopian film, right? This is also all often about making better futures, and it's a war over what the future is going to be. Evan, maybe I'll let you talk about what's going on in the West. I can speak a little bit to what's going on in the East. Particularly with Sputnik, right? And that's super important because then you have the space race. So in 1957 is when Sputnik, this Soviet satellite, goes up into space, and that just creates this entirely new space, an investment in aeronautic investment by both sides of the East and West Bloc. And so you have a real investment and a rush to create science fiction films in the East about that, to popularize it, to educate the public. And I'm looking, for instance, at a film like Road to the Stars in 1957, which was really a popular science film. This is a Soviet film. It was based on the life of a person named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who was sort of the Soviet East Bloc answer to Werner von Braun, who had developed the V2 rocket in Germany, and then had gone on to the United States to help develop space. And so this was really telling the story of Tsiolkovsky with rocket propulsion, space flight, and ballistics. And that really set a stage for a lot of other science fiction films in the East to come.
There was absolutely science fiction between Metropolis and Silent Star,
Yes.
but part of the issue is the sort of gulf between technological fiction of the future and geopolitical fiction of the future. And one of the good examples, actually, from the late Weimar, early Nazi era, is a film called FP1 Does Not Reply, which is it is a film that was directed by Carl Hartl, who then does work in the Nazi film industry, and it does star some folks from that same era. So of course it's sort of consigned to this idea of the right wing, but in principle it's about a world aircraft carrier, that an artificial island that is built in the Atlantic that unites Europe and the US, and it's a place where everybody can meet on the oceans. And if I also think of the Nazi era science fiction, it's very technologically focused. That would be Spaceship One Launches, which is the 1937 film by Anton Kutter. And that film is not really overtly political. Obviously, it's got the monumental architecture and a lot of overt references to sort of the advancement of Nazi technology. But in principle, it's a universal message of we're sending a person to the stars. Isn't that fascinating? And that, of course, raises the question of what is or isn't political. So to fast forward to West Germany, I think that those thoughts are still around, especially regarding space travel, but no one has the money to get a proper space film going in the 1950s. The East German film industry is way more developed in terms of at least film studio space, whereas in the West, they're much more of a hodgepodge of different private companies that are often seeking transnational co-productions. And this only accelerates in the 60s and 70s, where you have regular German, Italian, French, German co-productions. And of course, Silent Star is its own co-production. They couldn't make it without multiple countries being involved. So I think in the West, the geopolitical fictions take ahead. Again, there is a Robert Stemla film from 1948 called The Ballad of Berlin, which actually starts off with a future idea from around the year 2000 of what the architectural landscape will look like. And to some degree, it shares a lot with the brutalism of the East, but also the utopian projections of Metropolis. And that, of course, is then leading into a film that is definitely set in the ruins of 1948 Berlin, and a more or less kind of sad comedy. So there's a lot of that going on, where people are asking themselves, what is going to be our future and how will that look? But not a lot of ways of technologically realizing that through special effects on the screen. And I guess one of the main issues was the American science fiction films that really come out in the 1950s are for the drive-thrus. They are horror films. They are films about threats that are coming in, like War of the Worlds, where special effects from Hollywood create a crisis, and then the protagonists sort of magically fix it. And that did not feel comfortable to either West or East German filmmakers or audiences.
Interesting. And can you talk a little bit about DEFA, which I'm going to let you pronounce the actual Deutsche Film. What's that last word?
Aktiengesellschaft.
Thank you. Can you talk about the kind of other non-science fiction films that are being made? And also that they're the reason why you're saying that there's more money in film in East Germany. Is that right?
There's more studio capacity, and that'll be
Okay.
once Babelsberg gets back online in the 1950s. So what's interesting about DEFA is it's an East German film company founded with a mandate for education by the Soviet military administration. They really said this is the film company designed to re-educate the Germans after Nazism. And Kurt Maetzig, the director of Silent Star, is a direct participant in that legacy. His I would say first major film, and of course he's part of the initial team, but his first major film was called Marriage in the Shadows, an absolute melodrama classic about a Jewish family that is more or less torn apart and driven to suicide by the Nazi regime. And that earned him quite an interesting set of credentials as an anti-fascist producer, and then of course Maetzig goes on to do Song of the Sailors, which is the 40th anniversary of the 1918 Sailors Revolt that leads to the end of World War I. And so by the mid 1950s, he is the top, if not one of the top directors at the DEFA studios, pretty much able to call which projects he's going to work on and why.
And so he was also artistic director at DEFA. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
So he was he had his work permit revoked by the Nazi Party in the 1930s because his mother was Jewish, and then he secretly became a member of the Communist Party. So that's his background. So you can see why he would become a heavy hitter in kind of East Germany after the war. Sonja, we'll go to you about East Germany in 1960 and kind of idealism, art. Like, what's the cultural landscape like at this time?
Yes, sure. And I did want to just say one thing I found in researching for this talk today a little bit more. I didn't know Flash Gordon was actually filmed in Berlin in 1954 and 55. And our listeners might know that series, right? So that was sort of fascinating to me. What's so fascinating is that, as I was saying, you have this border, right, between East and West, and particularly between East and West Berlin. And that border is although it's not closed yet, and that would come with the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961. But the border was porous at that time. And so you would have people traveling back and forth across it, and even living on one side and working in another. And I say that because that really helped to shape a lot of this cultural dialogue in many ways that they were responding back and forth to each other in the German context and the broader context of the Cold War. In some of what I've written, I talk about utopian realism and focusing particularly at science fiction. This is a very useful concept because you have the idea of socialist realism, philosophy of really Marxism, Leninism, and utopian socialism, really focusing on the 19th century social movements, right, that were so popular also in the United States and all over Europe, to create a variety of different better futures. And Marx and Engels came in to say, this is our scientific socialism, which is based in science and progress and technology, and also this process development, the laws of history moving forward from feudalism to capitalism, and then to socialism, and then on to communism. And then particularly in Germany, I think what's useful to think about is that many of those who were in the East some of them had gone back to the East for Germany because they saw communism to be the only alternative to fascism. They had seen what had happened in Germany that had led to World War II, to the Holocaust, and said never again in that direction. So communism has to be our best next alternative. And so that led to this real focus on utopianism in that direction of trying to imagine a better world out of that particular context. And at the same time, you have this real autocratic, real ideological bent that's coming from the Soviet Union to say, we have to also control this utopia. This utopia can only look in a particular way. And so you would have politically these 5-year plans that would be drawn up to manage the country, and everything would be laid out, what would happen in the next 5 years to move to that communist utopia, which was the end goal of this vision. At the same time, you have all of this technological dreaming that's going on. You have all sorts of people also, of course, as one does as a human, dream about a variety of different futures. So there was this, and science fiction itself is all about imagining other futures from the point of view of today. And playing with those futures. This is this utopian piece, right, where you're thinking about how can we improve today to build up to that future of tomorrow, and how can we then, reversely, when you look at science fiction, what's in science fiction tells you about the dreams of the people who were writing it and making it at that particular time.
And I think that's definitely apparent in Silent Star.
It absolutely, yeah. And you have this struggle just going back and forth between the realism and the utopianism, right? And there's a constant push and pull with the portrayal and then the control of what can actually be portrayed. And that's where this utopian realism concept comes through.
And I wanted to say the 5-year programs, because I was looking into that. One was called the Bitterfelder Weg program. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Evan, can you?
So the Bitterfelder Weg is important because it comes out right as Silent Star is wrapping its production. And 1959 marks the date when East Germany sets forth the cultural program and says, actually, the writers and the artists of this country need to talk about the workplace, and that the workplace is going to be the primary site of narrative, setting themselves up for, of course, a dramatic disappointment and conflict in 1965 and 66, when lots of critical workplace dramas have come out, criticizing how the workplace operates in East Germany, and then of course the home also as a workplace for women, and for domestic labor also being dignified. So that all comes crashing down several years later. But in 1959, of course, the mandate is writers must go to the factories and they must document what's there and record the real lives of working people. And to be honest, the writers and artists believed in this program. They really did earnestly believe that they had been focusing on the wrong areas of life, especially with tales of kings and the middle class. And let's tell tales now about the working class. So if we take a look at Silent Star through the lens of looking at these experts also just as workers in a workplace drama that happens to be against the backdrop of all of humanity and a very specific set of crises on the mission. Yeah, Silent Star is a workplace drama, and and very much in line with the Bitterfelder Weg, and to some degree also reflecting the weaknesses of that, which is conflict is difficult when you can't say anything negative and you can't drive certain forms of meta plot.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that's also quite true of socialist realism, that we want to show the life of the average person, but that life has to be shown as perfect or near perfect. Let's go on to the fact that this is not just an East German production, but it's also, it began in Poland, which is where the writer Stanislaw Lem is from, and it's based on his book, The Astronauts.
The book by Stanislaw Lem is from 1951, Astronuats, and it is his very first book, first full-length book, and falls under the strict definition of hard science fiction. I don't think I've ever read a more hard sci-fi book, which goes into technical detail, and also every single character in that novel is competent. In some ways, boringly competent. They're so very good at their jobs that there isn't a lot of human weakness. So there are some moments of that. It's all men, and this all male space team is led by one Robert Smith, who is a African American Russian, who is basically someone who emigrated from the United States, or rather he has dual heritage. So his parents immigrated from the United States, and he grew up under communism, but also has sort of the Black American background as well. And this is quite clearly meant to be a unifying figure, as well as somebody who overcomes racial stereotypes, again, in the early 50s, about who gets to be competent, who gets to lead a mission, and so forth.
And I wanted to just say a little bit, I think, to the importance of Lem. And Evan mentioned the incredibly technological aspect of Astronuats, and it's so paradigmatic of its time, I think, of utopian realism. And it's very much less utopia and more realism, and setting, to publish science fiction at this time was so ideologically difficult, that, and the constrictions on what was possible, that it's really not surprising that it was really one of the first science fiction stories to come out post-war. And Lem would become so important in that space. He published between 56 and 68, 17 books. And so many of them have been played with, adapted in the East. And he was really creating space, ideological precedents, to be able to be talking about science fiction more broadly.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Can you talk a bit about the cross cultural Polish-German production there?
The screenplay did start in Poland. There was what was called the Polish October, which came about as I said, that started in 56. And that was one of the reasons why Lem could things sort of opened up. This was a thawing in Poland that allowed, and the Cold War was really all about political freezes and thaws. And so there was a lot more experimentation initial going on in Poland. And that's why, as I said, there was this idea to adapt the Lem popular story into a screenplay for Poland's first science fiction film. There are a lot of rewrites, and as Evan was mentioning, you have this primary character who is an American. That, I think, was the racial question. Interestingly, it was not as much of a focus for another reason that we can get to, but it really was the challenge of having an American as a primary lead. That ideologically, really. As we'll see, what happened was through the 12 rewrites, and at some point, the East Germany comes into play because we were talking about all the different co-productions, the sheer expense of producing a science fiction film, not only the building of the sets, but also all of the special effects. And then together with the international aspects, we've got the screenplay from Poland, the music, that is really fascinating. But you also have this desire to have an international cast. And you have, if you look through the archival material, there's all sorts of letters talking about the visas needed to get these actors to Berlin to be actually starring in the film. One of them being Yoko Tani, who was in France, and the expense.
So that's the actor that plays Sumiko, who's the main female lead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. DEFA itself was, as I said, wanted to produce a science fiction film as an answer to what was going on in the West. So Maetzig came on and put a very, very well-known screenwriter, Wolfgang Kohlhase, also on the project. And so they finally managed to get a screenplay, having switched the main character. Then the pilot love interest becomes a German, and the main primary leader then of the mission becomes a Soviet character.
Yeah, the guy who, I have to mention this because the first time he came on screen, I was like, that's Christopher Nolan. And he looks so much like him. It's shocking, but that's Professor Arseniev, who is the main character in there. Evan, can we talk a bit about why there was a need for 12 drafts of the script? And perhaps that might be the reason why one of the reasons why it's still not that driven, compelling. There is a kind of like a too many cooks spoiling the broth element, I think, in the script.
I absolutely agree. I will say Lem hated the film,
Mm.
and this was a process of moving from the literal script that he approved, which was produced by Illusion in Poland in 1956, and by that point, then a popular translation of the Polish book had hit German markets, so that all of this kind of possibility was there before Sputnik, and then of course when Sputnik hit, they were dreaming of getting French stars like Simone Signoret and other major personalities in the 1950s, and as Sonja mentioned, dreaming up the ways that they were going to actually pay them because West currency was in short supply.
I think Lem actually called it a trashy screenplay at some point.
Yeah.
Yes,
They took his
absolutely.
name off, right? He said, take my name off of this
Yeah.
film.
Of this trashy screenplay.
So the evolution was the Poles took a very lighthearted approach to the material, and the original approved screenplay was adapted by another team in Poland that added a love interest and a lighthearted, character named Marina, who would add a little bit of levity to otherwise the serious, hard sci-fi. And that character Marina angered everyone across the board for various reasons, both for openly sexist reasons and then also, I would think, valid reasons of this character is meant to make all of the men look better, and maybe they should have their own autonomous storyline. So again, they sort of inject a woman into this script without really considering what the implications that would have, and then from there the script begins to morph also along the lines of American versus Russian, and as the different partners begin to fall into place, um, first of all, they couldn't get a Russian actor, actually. And initially, Russia didn't want to have anything to do with this particular film. And so that was its own question.
Was there any particular reason for that?
There was almost silence from Moscow regarding this, and I think it was partially this is my guess, is that it was considered to be sort of this decadent Western co-production effort that will fail inevitably, and so why would we support that? The script basically transitioned between people coming up with a draft, it being too entertaining, and so they have to rewrite it, and then by the time it gets to sort of the functionaries, they say, why is there not really a direct accusation of America, of the United States, in having participated in atomic war? And that's where we get both two key components that are not at all in the original Lem piece, Sumiko's Hiroshima backstory, as well as the pivotal New York skyscraper sequence where we are introduced to Wiemann, a Oppenheimer substitute. And they literally have the East German fantasy of Oppenheimer doing penance right there among his colleagues and saying, I am sorry for having built the atomic bombs for the Americans. I have to go to bed now.
Yeah.
So if that felt a little stiff and imposed, it's because it is. In addition, in the original script, only Sigmar the robot dies. It's called Sigmar, then becomes Robot Omega. The East German title of the Lem adaptation is Planet of Death. So now, and that was always one of the script adaptation titles. Okay, it's called Planet of Death. So maybe there should be death on the planet. Now there's a question of who should be killed or sacrificed on the planet. And as you know from the final film, it eventually settles on the East German pilot Brinkmann, on the African communication officer Talua, and Chen Yu, the biologist. And each one of them gets their own moment in the film of being validated for having valiantly sacrificed themselves. All of that is added maybe 4 or 5 drafts of the script in. So even sort of major story outcomes were, I would say, more or less determined by state entities in dialogue with the script writers.
Evan, you also mentioned that a very popular US film, Forbidden Planet, may have had a bit of an influence on The Silent Star.
Yeah.
1950s US sci-fi is huge. It's being exported everywhere. It's popular. I love it. We love it. What kind of influence would that have had in East Germany? Which would have some restrictions, I imagine, in terms of what kind of cultural entities were coming in?
I know that we're all science fiction geeks and we love to see how science fiction influences each other in a kind of closed circle. But I want to mention, in addition to Woman in the Moon being, I think, the most important German text, like they really said this is going to be the East German Woman in the Moon, which also means that the Cosmocrator, the spaceship, looks exactly like the old Woman in the Moon spaceship.
It's a beautiful spaceship.
It is.
I really like it. Yeah.
I love the sequence when there's the spotlight going around on planet Venus. I could watch that forever. But in addition, there was a not science fiction film, again, a co-production that was called If All the Guys in the World. And this was mentioned by Kurt Maetzig actually in the documentation around the film. And if all the Guys in the World was like 1955, 56, it's a ham radio operator movie where a diverse group of people get on a boat. There's food poisoning. The Muslim who didn't eat meat is then suddenly in a decisive position to save everybody else. And then it's the world ham radio operators to the rescue, and they're all in this delightful sort of communication. And even though that has nothing to do with science fiction, the kind of gesture of binding the worlds together through technological and scientific know-how, and especially improvisation on the spot when all of your big plans fail, was really moving to the East Germans as well as others at the time. And then also, of course, there's the American science fiction in the room. Forbidden Planet is a huge influence on the soundtrack. The Poles are directly inspired by that, and then use more or less those electronic warbles to inspire their own work on the soundtrack of the film. And the overall look of the film also parallels Forbidden Planet as well. I would say Forbidden Planet, as you've mentioned on your podcast, is one of the most important sort of establishing texts for what a science fiction film could look like or sound like.
Great, thank you. Sonja, can we talk a bit about the actual film now? Because we have absolute diversity. Like, I haven't seen anything in the US that even comes close. I mean, it will do once we get to Star Trek in the 60s, potentially, and even then, not to this extent. Can we talk a bit about that kind of element and how, and you've already mentioned they've got visa issues, they're getting as many different people in as possible. And also, there does seem to be a complete lack of a protagonist, which I think adds to the fact that it seems like a sprawling film that you don't exactly know who you're, vying for and whose perspective it's from.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think just on the last comment, so often in science fiction, it's not about the people, it's about what they represent, right? And you have the different scientists who all fit together as the perfect crew, and fulfilling each of their own particular roles. So that's really, it's not about the personality. And that's, I think, the real difference between Western science fiction and Eastern science fiction is you have the individual hero, often male hero in the West, and it's about the personality, where in the East, it's about the collective, right? So you're already noticing a difference there. And in this particular case is, I think, unique in many ways in its desire, where it's taking the international socialist brotherhood image. And I say brotherhood because we keep talking about these women who are sort of inserted because, oh, by the way, yeah, there are women and we should probably put them in here. But they're never really figuring out what that means. And we can talk about that in a minute.
There's a scene where there's about 10 women in saris. But they don't actually say anything, they're there. They're there doing important technical things.
Yeah, it's still a very male script, male gaze, right? Yeah. But this idea of everyone coming together in peace and, of course, in communist harmony, right? This vision of the future that is particularly a peaceful one, drawing specific reference to the most recent dropping of the atom bomb in Japan. And that's really why you have a Japanese character, right, brought in to talk about Hiroshima specifically, and of course, Nagasaki implicitly. And that then is perceived and cast as very specifically a Western capitalist U.S. Aggression. The East then is the peaceful future, right? And where there will be no war, and that gets back to the international brotherhood and needing to show all of the scientists working together. And that's also, it's common in Eastern Bloc science fiction to have these future international space commissions of everyone getting together, right? It's kind of like the UN version of it, but it's always led by a Soviet, typically in that case.
And also, it's got that kind of dated way. I mean, there is the brotherhood, but they have like, this is the Japanese person, this is the Chinese person, and we've got a Polish person, and then this is the African person. He's just like somewhere in Africa. We don't know where.
Well, and actually, if you look at who was cast, right, it was, so who are we going to get to play this character, right? And I think Evan can probably say a little bit more about this because you've written on this specifically. But when I was looking, so they found a medical student to play him, who was, and I'm not sure, when I was looking, I was either Nigeria or Kenya.
Yeah, he's from Kenya.
Okay.
So this is Talua in the film, and he's apparently the first Black actor portrayed as traveling in space.
Yes.
So that's quite good. Evan, do you want to tell us a bit more about him?
Oh yeah, Julius Ongewa is of course fascinating because he kind of we don't know much about him biographically, but we do know to some degree he is evidence of how the system treats people. So on the one hand, Kurt Maetzig really insists on an international cast and insists on there being at least one of the cosmonauts as a Black character. Again, initially as an African American, and then as they get sidelined, and you can even watch this as the process, right? They start off as a Russian Black American like protagonist, the captain and leader of the mission, and by the end of the development, they're the communication officer who happens to be sacrificed on the planet. But I will say Talua still plays a really important role, and he was found at as a medical student in Leipzig at Karl Marx University, and the producer effectively went to the university, found Ongewa, and Ongewa said, "Look, I've got exams, so I've got to fit this in sometime before my medical board exams." And so he brought a skeleton with him to the shooting, and sort of set up there. Almost immediately, the production team realized that he was getting like 7 East marks a day or something like that as a general student stipend, and that was it. And as the production proceeded, and that he did take on an actual role of one of the 8 main crew members, it became apparent to everyone on the team that they were engaged in racially discriminatory payment practices, and sought to improve those over time. And said, no, actually, we should be paying him a lot more. And the situation got better, but not great. And so his pay gap was addressed. I don't think he made any kind of stink about it on the set, but it was definitely noticed by multiple people who said, okay, if you're going to actually address racial discrimination in the text of the film, you should probably also address it in the basic political economy of the film. Who gets paid what for what roles?
Absolutely. As we've kind of suggested, the film itself, the story isn't hugely compelling. I think it's important because it is the kind of first of the Eastern Bloc science fiction films. But visually, it's fantastic, in my opinion. I love the little insects, the little electrical insects, which are part of their library, because when the character goes down, he falls into a pit, and then he gets attacked by these little mini flying robots. And it's like, no, he's actually fallen into a library. And these are all like, I mean, can we talk a bit about the idea of this technology and of the Venusian civilization?
I want to add we're talking about special effects that Alfred Hirschmeyer, who did the sets, of course, worked all the way back in the Weimar Republic on these mega productions such as Metropolis, and then Ernst and Vera Kunstmann, who did the actual visual effects, were active in the Nazi era on their most famous special effects film, Munchausen. So I would say that the continuities between sort of the big budget silent era blockbusters through to the late 1950s are really important in what makes this film a landmark to this day. You just have a lot of talent that's coming in, and okay, sure, there's confusing script, sure, the cast like may or may not be able to act very well, but oh my gosh, can we nail this look that will continue to kind of haunt science fiction, not only in East Germany, but also model it throughout the Eastern Bloc.
There's so much dreaming. The special effects, I think, are quite unique. And if you think in terms of all of the portrayal of what this alternate landscape looks like, you have a number of other films coming out around this time from the Soviet Union, but they didn't get the play right as much as the Silent Star. So I think that is indicative that this was a more successful film for that reason. And it did sell 4.3 million tickets, right, when it was shown. So I do think that there is a certain success. Why, right, is the question. The anti-war message, I think, was very compelling still at that time. But the arms race, right? It's starting up with an arms race, and what happens then, and you see this idea of the arms race, I think, is really present in so many people's minds who are watching this. And inevitably, you see that play out in the film. On Venus, they're able to demonstrate what happens, with nuclear destruction. And it's on another planet. It's displaced. And, of course, there's the attack of the killer tar, right? Which is drawing directly from the Western
the
horror
slime,
film, right? The slime, right? Which I think it took up all of the resources in East Germany for that year, right? You couldn't get any of that anywhere because it was all being used for the film.
What is it? Is it just tar, or is it like?
I think it's just tar.
It's library paste. They said it's bookbinder paste.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. And I find the typical the trope of the woman getting stuck first and the way
and
they
screaming, right?
Yeah.
You have to have this scream, right?
She turns around, she kind of gets stuck in the slime, and then the man just comes and slightly pulls her and she just comes out, and it's like, oh, come on, they could have put a little bit more effort in. And then later they're all covered in it and it's absolutely fine.
Exactly. And then there's a scientific explanation for why that happened, right? And that's important because it's not this fantastical horror being that's after them. No, it was a real electronic, power. There was a reason for that and why it receded. And then, of course, it leads to the end of the film.
That era, 1960, it kind of really nails what we would expect of like high-end set design. So obviously, if they've got that kind of heritage, it would be expected. Can you talk a little bit about the colour of this film? Because it's not quite Technicolor and it has a bit of a history, Evan.
So this film was shot in Agfacolor. Agfacolor is an innovation also from the Third Reich. The first Agfacolor film was called Women Are Better Diplomats. It was a light, sort of courtly comedy, and then Munchausen, which I mentioned earlier, was also in color, and there were other films that really embraced this Agfacolor. But one of the issues, of course, is that it was produced at IG Farben's factory in Wolfen, which is also the same place that produced Zyklon B, the gas that was used literally in the gas chambers of the Holocaust. And so that heritage, it was more or less still there when the East Germans took over the factories, and they of course did not want to lose the advanced chemical expertise sort of contained in those facilities. Chemical exports were extremely important to the East German economy, and so they had a sort of awkward dance with the old Third Reich history with those chemicals. But Agfacolor then eventually gets sort of rebranded because Agfacolor still has this direct relationship with the Third Reich to Orvo color, which then is a slightly adapted version. And I would say if you want to compare it with Technicolor highlights reds, blues better, sort of the primary colors, whereas Agfacolor and then the later Orbo color rest on a sort of brown framework. So everything is a little warmer. I would say very bluntly more brown, but also you'll notice that if you screen, say, Forbidden Planet next to Silent Star, that every color is a little more muted, and I would say better blended with its surroundings.
Apart from that kind of vermilion orange, I feel that really kind of pops out. So I just wanted you, Evan, to mention something that I didn't realize, which is the American version edit, which is called First Spaceship on Venus, was actually not given freely. Is that the right way to put it?
Yeah, there was no direct transaction, and no royalties were ever paid on that to the East German government. It went via a company in Liechtenstein called Interfilm. That copy of the film wound up in the hands of Crown International, and Crown International then made drastic edits. The film we call First Spaceship on Venus, which also Mystery Science Theater 3000 did a viewing of, is 14 minutes shorter than the East German and Polish original cut. But that copy that was circulating for Spaceship on Venus was illegal, and it was not validated by the East German government in any way.
And they didn't get any of the profits, which could have added to the fact that it was not making its money back.
That's correct.
And I just wanted to point out the differences that I could notice in the two. The first Spaceship on Venus I watched the MST 3K version, so I had to watch people commenting on it. But for example, it says, in a peaceful world, we do not keep our successes to ourselves. Take Luna 3, for example, the socialist lunar station. They're obviously going to cut that out.
Exactly.
And that whole kind of the plot of the American scientist who isn't really allowed to come and be part of this kind of universal mission. And then also the part which kind of he suggests that you're a woman, so it's your nature and to be nurturing and have children, and then she goes into the Hiroshima situation. That's obviously completely cut out because America do not want to be reminded about Hiroshima. Sonja, can we talk about the legacy of this film?
Yeah, so it's continues to live on, right, as we talk about it today. One in First Spaceship on Venus, and as you said, in Mystery Science Theater 2000. A lot of interest has been taken in it. It was a collection of all of the main GDR science fiction films, which include Signals and Eolomea, which are in the early 70s. And then In the Dust of the Stars, which came out in 1976, the DEFA Film Library put that out as a DVD collection. And that came with this wonderful restoration, right? You're talking about the color. I was watching it last night again and just really impressed with the quality of that. And
is that the quite recent one that's just come out a few weeks ago?
No, that one actually is yet another collection that has come out from the UK as well. I don't have the name of that in front of me, but that was really exciting.
Add it in the show notes.
Yeah, please do, because I think that's really exciting. And I think too that the international cast, right, we talk in terms of Star Trek coming out later after this. Uhura, of course, you have as an African-American communications officer. Tolua is a communications officer in The Silent Star. It still stands the test of time with this international cast in a way so early on. And the message of the film continues to speak to viewers, I think. And it is watchable. But I think at the time in the 60s, in the Sputnik era, it's really a period piece that speaks well to all that was going on at the time. And there were a lot of other films that were coming out in Czechoslovakia. Ikari, XB1 by Polak is a wonderful film. It came out in 1963. And I would really, if people are looking for other films to watch, take a look at that. There's also Planet of the Storms that I mentioned earlier in 1958. There are, other Krakatit, which came out in 48. That was a little bit earlier from the Czechoslovakia, but there's a lot available there as well in that space.
Okay, great. Evan, can you talk a bit about the legacy and then maybe go into your recommendations for listeners?
Well, I really appreciate the earnestness of this film, right? Where they, first of all, they declare that communism has won over capitalism more or less by 1970. It's very optimistic, and that optimistic energy, frankly, as an American, where you're used to, films being about like your own individual power fantasy or the fact that the universe is terrifying and wants to kill you, is really moving, right? Where actually the humanity has more or less solved its social problems. They mention in passing that they solved the problem of food. That Chen Yu has figured out how to convert inorganic matter into food, and and there are parts of that make me tear up now that maybe in my 20s I thought, well, this is hokey, and now you think, no, everyone in this film really believes in science, and there is a uniting quality to that, everyone kind of participating in that project without without losing sight of the fact that fascism destroyed so much, right? And also recognizing that the US is still complicit in World War II crimes as much as the Nazis, which is, and of course Russia is then the giant missing piece in here. But I again always ask the question, what is the language that this film is supposed to be in?
Mm-hmm.
What language
That is really interesting.
is the crew supposed to be speaking, right? Are they all speaking in German? Well, that wouldn't work. Are they all speaking in Russian? That would probably be the default, but again, the Russians didn't really support this. So there's an ambiguity about what are they, what language are they speaking in, because no one ever has any language difficulties, more or less. I mean, Tallulah has an accent, but there's nothing saying, okay, I have parts of my culture that prevent me from speaking, or I only just now started learning X language so I could be on the crew. And that is again trying to highlight how sort of international this production is.
It is interesting because that is a common problem with science fiction. And even when they have the American delegation in the film, they're all speaking German. So like it's with each other. And I think really only Douglas Adams and his Babelfish is the only real solution to these kind of sci-fi questions.
Exactly.
I mean, actually, there's a much more recent film, Danny Boyle's Sunshine, that gets to some of the meat of this as well, where Sunshine is a horror film, and the object of horror is our very own sun. The sun is horrifying in every possible way, and you didn't really think about that until you watch Sunshine. But the crew is very similar to that of Silent Star. They're competent, they trust each other. They're mostly men, but then most of the plot of Sunshine is put into motion by a single crew member making a single miscalculation, and from there, then the entire plot line more or less unfolds. And I don't want to give too much away, but that idea of you have a racially diverse, competent crew who trust each other, who work well together. That it's really great actually to kind of enjoy and vicariously experience in a film.
And do you have a recommendation for listeners?
Oh gosh,
You could go with Sunshine, I suppose.
I think Sunshine is my because I just love that movie so much.
Okay, Sonja, any other additions to the things you've already mentioned?
One other thing that I would recommend, if you're interested in East Bloc cinema, there's a film called Amphibian Man. The story originally came out in 1928. And that if you know Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water that came out in 2017, you will know that is a direct play on Amphibian Man. And so I can't recommend that enough. And then also delving into the Russian antecedent of that, I think.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Wonderful. That's it for this episode. Next episode, we will be talking about Village of the Damned from 1960, so check out the show notes to find out where you can watch that. Thank you so much for all of you listening, and if you can leave a review or a rating on your favourite podcasting app, it would mean a lot. If you can share the podcast, that would also be amazing. And if you want to support the podcast further, as well as get ad-free episodes, please do go on to my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/every sci-fi film. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined. I really, really appreciate it. It really helps me keep up with the show and my aspirations of being a real podcast bro. I'll see you all again next time.